Another Steam Next Fest happened, and naturally there were a lot of awesome demos, so here are some of my favorites. MonsterCon, the fourth game in the Monster Prom series, comes with some small but significant changes to its dating sim formula. You still pick from a series of locations that increases one of your stats before being presented with two ridiculous solutions to an even more ridiculous scenario, and you still have to pick one based on vague context clues hinting at what stat the choices use. But now, instead of passing or failing based on those stats, it seems like you always kind of succeed, and now you're given a +2 to whatever stat the choice was based on, and a -2 to the one that the stat that you didn't pick. So, for example, if option 1 is a say creative choice and option 2 is a fun choice, you succeed no matter what, but if you picked option 1, you get a +2 to creative and a -2 to fun, and vice versa if you pick the other option. It's kind of like a, interesting, let's see where this goes kind of thing for me, because on one hand it encourages more experimentation. In past Monster Prom games there were tons of options I just never took because I usually didn't have the right stat for it. I was just never built for it when the option arose. But in Monster Con, since I don't have to worry about failing and only about which stat I would be rewarded with, I felt far more encouraged to just pick whatever looked more fun, just to see what would happen, see the funny ha-has the excellent writers surely wrote. It also allowed for more roleplay. I felt I could actually form a personality for my character and adhere to it more reliably, picking things based on what I felt they would do, and not just on who I want to romance, although that was a pretty big factor admittedly. And it achieves all this without losing any of the tension that comes from picking the wrong choice. It still hurts when you get a -2 to a stat you know you need to woo your monstrous boo, and instead pick up a +2 to something that's kind of useless to you in that run. At the same time, it doesn't hurt quite as much as outright failing in past Monster Prom games, that sometimes made it feel like you wasted your turn. They were funny, sure, some of the best jokes came from the failing, but I mean, the rest of the game is really funny too, and now this allows the best jokes to be saved for your successes, and the writing is still really on point here. It's still hilarious. It's rare for a game to make me laugh out loud, but Wormlium got me pretty good, I have to admit. Monster Prom has always been so good at that absurd type of humor. We get a mostly new cast of waifus and husbandos to romance, like a lovable nerdy slime boy, a VTuber clown lady, an ancient goth demon, and a mimic chess with Liam and Zoe returning to round out the cast. I am so excited to learn more about all of these characters. In the brief demo they all already just oozed so much personality. Sometimes literally. And I also kind of like the push and pull of one stat going up and another going down. It's an interesting evolution on a now established formula that honestly I wish more dating sims copied. And now, keeping with the ridiculous and the monsters we have, Shotgun Cop. On a quest to kill Satan, we meet Shotgun Cop. He's got a shotgun, and he's a cop. Or he is a cop, whatever, Shotgun Cop. To navigate the hellish world of hell, he utilizes his trusty shotgun for what it was made for. To propel him through the air, all while kicking demon butt as quickly as can be. Tricky at first, but Shotgun Cop cleverly aims away from his target to propel himself in the opposite direction in order to effectively fly, unless he flies into spikes. But he's Shotgun Cop, so I'm sure it was on purpose. He always automatically reloads when he lands though, giving him up to 3 shots. His adventures feel fast and frantic, requiring you to quickly and cleverly use your shotgun to fly through the levels while eliminating all demon scum. Some areas had me, Shotgun Cop, carefully lining up each shot to carefully navigate narrow spike-filled passageways. Others had me flying around arenas, blasting demons and narrowly avoiding shots with my trusty shotgun. It had a Super Meat Boy or Hotline Miami feel to it where it can be brutally difficult, but you can't help but strive for perfection, hitting that restart button over and over again until you succeed and you don't even realize hours have passed in your obsession. The clever level design forces you to use your shotgun in equally clever ways, like precisely propelling yourself around corners, weaving through spikes or enemies all too happy to take a blast of Shotgun Cop to the face. What? And if you want to earn all of the medals, you have to use your shotgun to not only propel yourself through the level, but often also time it perfectly to also kill demon scum, to make the most efficient use of your time. Shotgun Cop may be simple, he can't even jump, but it creates a fast and addictive gameplay loop that I had trouble putting down. Okay, I'll stop now, I promise. To slow it down a bit, have you ever gone to a game or a movie or whatever and you know what it's about, but you're like, interesting theme, but I don't know if I'll relate to it. Then you experience it and you're like, oh no, why do I feel called out? Why do I relate to this so hard? That was Wanderstop for me. Wanderstop is about burnout, and it looks to be really diving into the topic. You play as the world's best swordsperson, undefeated for 3 years straight until they're not. No problem, nothing a good training montage can't fix after all, except it doesn't. So you seek out the world's former greatest swordsperson who has hidden themselves in the woods, but along the way you lose the ability to even lift your own sword and pass out. Luckily, you're found by a local tea shop owner who convinces you to help out. I feel a lot of cozy games have an underlying vibe of getting away from it all in favor of a calmer, more relaxing life, but most don't actually dive into the subject matter. The theme is kind of just there as if it's inherent to the genre. But Wanderstop does look to be diving in, and diving in deep. And despite there being no violence in the game at all, it feels so brutal sometimes, seeing your character mentally beating themselves up for really small things sometimes, or the guilt they feel just because they're slowing down, even if they know it's good for them. The game seems to be written really well with really interesting and endearing characters, and a story that has a lot to say. The gameplay is mostly what you expect from a cozy game like this. You divide your time between farming and running the tea shop. But the game uses that slower gameplay to further its characters, its themes, its story. Brewing the tea is on paper a lengthy process, and even when you remove the farming element, you still have to contend with this giant machine that requires you to spin around it on a big ladder, pulling levers and spinning dials just to get one cup. But also all feels just so whimsical. This machine looks like something out of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something the Mad Hatter would use. The whole game juxtaposes that whimsical charm with that darker story of burnout. The farming requires careful planning to grow the seeds you need. You have to plant certain seeds in certain patterns or combinations while making sure to take a trip down to the lake to get some water for them, making you slow down a bit, making you take your time. It looks like it'll be really fun to carefully plan out my garden, both to make the most out of it of course, but also just to make it look nice. And the game also looks really nice as well. Lots of bright, vibrant colors sell that whimsical vibe I mentioned earlier. The whole game feels like a fairy tale. It does what I think games should be doing. It marries the gameplay with its narrative to where they're almost inseparable. And it does it really well, at least judging from the demo. Okay, that's enough cozy games, with a side of existentialism granted. We need adrenaline. Let's get some Fumes. That sounds like drugs. Fumes the game, that is, which is basically just Mad Max without the max. Right from the get-go, you're thrown into a car with a small arsenal bolted onto it and let loose onto other cars, bolts and oil flying in a cascade of carnage. It is vehicular combat at its best, which, to be fair, we don't get much of nowadays. It has a dash of twisted metal to it in that the weapons are almost comically sized for the vehicle they adorn, and how they function makes little sense but still has that grittiness to them. Everything feels like it has a thin caked on layer of dirt, oil, and blood. The gameplay is satisfyingly fast, with enemy cars zipping around you, firing off their own shots while others covered in saw blades try to ram you. It was surprisingly easy to navigate and aim at the same time. It does take a bit to get used to, but I didn't crash into walls nearly as often as I expected. And all the weapons felt weighty and impactful. There appears to be a bunch of customization options as well, from purely cosmetic like colors and stickers to ones with more gameplay effects like weapons and bodies. The game also drops a bunch of loot every mission you do, so I was always interested in what I got. But I'm not entirely sold on the game being open world. It helps prevent you from crashing into anything since, it's big open world, and there was a fair amount of stuff to do, but little between those missions. That being said, as the Forza Horizon games have proven, it's kind of just fun to drive around an open world, and driving around a post-apocalyptic open world sounds all the more enticing. The driving did feel a little floaty though. It took a bit to get used to, but I did get used to it. And finally, the demo had this really cool set piece where you're fighting this giant factory on wheels. It was a multi-stage fight starting with you taking out its weapons and brakes until you board the thing and drive up it in a car version of Shadow of the Colossus. It was really cool and unique. If they can keep throwing stuff like that at you, this game could be incredible. And our next game, which has an incredible setting, is Mecha. It is exactly what it says on the tin. You have a big robot that's approximately 90% head, and you use that to fight dragons. Save the village. Maybe the people. Maybe, I guess. The demo was pretty short, only giving you really one fight, but with the premise as good as what if medieval times there were giant robots and they used them to fight dragons, it definitely has promise. The robot had a satisfying weight to it. It's not quite Monster Hunter because you can dash out of some attacks, but animations were just a bit long, in a good way. It felt like a big hunk of metal you had to maneuver around. When you pushed a button, you had to be sure you wanted to push that button because now you're dedicated. It felt like a giant robot as I ran through buildings, crushed any wayward peasants, and crashed down for a devastating attack on the dragon. I had to be careful and wait for openings to attack or risk being knocked across the village. It is objectively cool. If this game just ends up being a big boss rush, I'll be fine with that because the dragon we fight in the demo was so much fun. The chunky red dragon flew and flopped its devastating way through the battlefield while breathing fire, forcing me to pick and choose when I'd move in and manage my heat. If they can add enough enemy variety and creative boss fights, and let me stomp through enough medieval environments, I'm sold. Robots in a fantasy world is just a really fun idea. And next we return to the classic sewers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown, which breaks away from the series' tendency towards the beat-em-up genre and makes it a strategy game instead, while funnily enough, still maintaining some of that beat-em-up DNA. On the surface, it's what you expect from a strategy game. You move the turtles across a board and you have action points you spend on movement and abilities. But what's interesting is Areas of the map will fall away gradually as the level goes on, and you and enemies will die if they stay there. It's a bit like how beat-em-ups have you beating up all the enemies on the screen before forcing you to move forward. This makes the game feel really fast compared to other strategy games. In fact, it still feels kind of like a beat-em-up in ways. Strategy was still definitely key to success, don't get me wrong, but the map falling away created a constant sense of forward momentum, and turns and animations always moved fast, and you're not relegated to a movement phase and an action phase like in some other games. You have action points that you can use them on whatever you want, whenever you want, so long as you have enough points for it. So I would move into range, beat up some Foot Clan, and move again to beat up some more or get some distance from other enemies. As a strategy game fan, the speed the game moves at was actually kind of refreshing, from the slow, thinky kind of games that most strategy games are, while still making me feel like a tactical genius. Another thing that helps that feeling of speed was the fact that you only get to use one turtle per level, so even if you're sitting there planning ahead, it's nowhere near as complicated as say an XCOM or something, while still giving plenty of room for strategy fans to flex that big brain of theirs, while also giving each turtle their time to shine. And the turtles felt more distinct here than most other games. Mikey is all about movement with a few key skills that propel him through enemies. Raph, on the other hand, prefers to pull enemies towards him, and if not that, jumping right into the fight while hitting as many people as possible. Donnie felt the most unique with a series of traps and stuns, and Leo can hit hard, like really hard, while juggling enemies. My only issue was that several attacks applied some sort of effect, but didn't explain what those effects were. It just needs some tooltips to explain some things easier. Other than that, this is shaping up to be an excellent strategy game and an even better Turtles game. So those were some of my favorite demos from Steam Next Fest. This one felt especially good, and there were tons of stuff I just didn't get time to talk about, like Nice Day for Fishing, which is an RPG, but all about fishing that has surprisingly deep mechanics, just wish there was less button mashing. Or Geno Kids, which was a fun action game that had you swapping characters mid-combat in order to extend combos, and plenty more that I'm sure I missed. So let me know what you liked. And if you liked this video, like and subscribe and all that, and have a good one.